Many believe that to advance they need constant support, emotional backing, an environment that pushes them forward. They expect someone to motivate them, rescue them, accompany them at every step. But that thought weakens them, because if your strength depends on others, your path will always be unstable. I, Brian Tracy, have learned that great advances occur when one decides to walk alone, not out of pride, but out of conviction, not because you don't need anyone, but because you no longer depend on anyone. When you learn to fight alone, you discover your true power. You become firm, focused, unstoppable, because you understand that discipline, purpose, and resilience are born in the silence of your own decisions. You don't need company, you need determination, and when you act from that inner strength, the world stops seeming like an obstacle and becomes the stage for your transformation. The first principle I had to embrace to change my life was accepting that no one is coming to save me. No one, no matter how much love they have for you, no matter what support they promise, no matter how close they are. There are battles only you can fight. Dark moments where neither the wisest advice, nor the warmest hug, nor the most sincere help is enough. Because there are pains you have to feel in solitude, decisions only you can make, paths only you can walk. And the sooner you accept that, the faster you stop waiting, the faster you get up, the faster you take control. For years, I waited for someone to see my effort, for someone to understand my struggle, for someone to lift me up when I fell. I didn't do it with malice. I did it from exhaustion, from the need to feel held up. But that desire tied me down, made me vulnerable, because deep down, I still believed my progress depended on others. Until one day, in the middle of a brutal fall, I realized I was alone. No one else could make that decision for me. No one else could put one foot in front of the other. No one else could hold me up in that abyss. Either I did it or I didn't get out of there. That was my awakening. The moment I stopped looking for external hands and started building internal strength. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't with pretty phrases. It was with pain, with silence, with a determination I had never felt before. I began to do what had to be done without expecting recognition. I started keeping my commitments, even when no one was watching. I started holding myself up from within, even when everything crumbled outside, because I understood that true character isn't formed in company. It is forged in solitude. And that solitude, which at first frightened me, became my teacher. It showed me who I was when I had no one to impress. It forced me to listen to myself, to ask myself what I truly wanted, what I was willing to sacrifice, what I could no longer postpone. It taught me to trust my judgment, my intuition, my ability to rebuild without applause. Because when no one holds you up, you learn to walk with firmness, not because you're the strongest, but because you have no other choice. And that urgency brings out a strength you didn't even know you had. Since then, I stopped waiting. I no longer seek to be understood, validated, or rescued. I took charge, and in that act, I found a freedom I had never felt before. Because when you no longer depend on anyone, what you build is yours. What you achieve belongs to you. What you advance is real. I learned there is nothing more powerful than a man who no longer needs company to move, who no longer needs witnesses to commit, who no longer needs consolation to stay firm. He only needs a reason, a vision, and the unbreakable will to keep going, even if he's alone, especially if he's alone. Because that's where everything starts. That's where true power is formed. The second principle that became a law in my life was to stop begging for emotional support, because there's a hard but necessary truth. The more you depend on others' mood, the more fragile your progress will be. It's natural to want to be heard, understood, encouraged. But if you turn that need into a condition, you are surrendering your power, because no one has the obligation to motivate you. No one is in debt to you. Everyone has their own world, their own battles, their own limits. And if you expect others to lift you up every time you fall, you'll keep waiting while your opportunity grows cold. I lived it. I shared my goals enthusiastically, expecting encouragement. I talked about my falls, expecting understanding. I exposed my wounds, expecting empathy. And when what I needed didn't come, I got frustrated. I felt betrayed. But it wasn't betrayal, it was reality. Life doesn't revolve around my emotions. No one has the obligation to hold me up, and understanding that didn't make me cold. It made me strong, because the day I let go of the expectation of being understood, I started walking with a new lightness. Suddenly, my steps were my own. My motivation didn't depend on external reactions. I started getting up out of conviction, not for applause. I learned that the most powerful support doesn't come from outside. It comes from the respect you earn for yourself, from the commitment you sustain even when no one recognizes it, from the silent effort you make without expecting reward. Because when you manage to stay firm on your gray days, when you advance without witnesses, when you build without anyone celebrating, something inside you changes. You see yourself differently, you respect yourself more, and that respect can't be bought. It's forged in solitude, in tiredness, in repetition, without applause. Stopping begging for support doesn't mean closing yourself off to love or deep relationships. It means you no longer build from lack. You no longer advance hoping to be rescued. You advance because you know who you are, because you're no longer looking for someone to complete you. You're completing yourself. That difference is everything. Because a man who takes charge of his emotions stops demanding understanding and starts offering stability. He no longer needs, he chooses. He no longer asks, he creates. He no longer begs, he holds himself up. And when that happens, your presence changes. People perceive you differently because you are complete, because you don't need validation to have direction, because you can be surrounded by people or absolutely alone, and your vision remains firm. You're no longer guided by fear of abandonment, but by commitment to your purpose. You no longer act to be seen. You act because you know where you're going. And if someone accompanies you, fine. But if not, you still go with your head held high, your feet firm, your will intact. That's what marks the difference between a man who tries and a man who achieves. The achiever doesn't wait for pats on the back, doesn't seek approval. He just breathes deeply, grits his teeth, and keeps going because he knows what he's building doesn't need an audience. It only needs discipline, focus, and the determination to fight even if completely alone. Especially when completely alone, because where no one sees you is where the version of you that changes everything is formed. The third principle I forged with blood and conviction was to stop complaining, because complaining may seem harmless, even human, but in reality it's one of the most destructive habits that exists. Every time you complain, you're telling yourself you have no power, that circumstances are stronger than your will, that the problem has more force than your decision, and that gets recorded, becomes an internal discourse that slowly erodes your spirit, your identity, your action. Complaining is the language of men who have given up on building. I spent years complaining about lack of opportunities, about injustices in the system, about others, about myself. I complained because it seemed fair, because I felt I was right. And maybe I was, but complaining never solved anything, never made me stronger, never brought me closer to my goals. On the contrary, it weakened me, made me feel like a victim, made me wait for external solutions, pushed me toward cynicism, to think nothing is worth it, nothing changes, it's better to give up. And in that state, you start dying while still alive. Until one day, facing the mirror, I confronted myself with a brutal question. How much of what hurts me have I sustained myself by not doing what I know I have to do? How much have I fed with my passivity, my excuses, my complaints? The answer was painful, but it freed me, because it took off the victim mask and gave me back control. I decided from that moment to become someone who acts, not someone who laments, someone who observes what's wrong and faces it, not with complaints, but with work, not with words, but with results. I started replacing every complaint with a powerful question. What can I do with this? Not what should the world do? Not what should the other person change? What can I do? And that question, repeated every day, transformed me, because where before I saw walls, I started seeing roots. Where before I felt rage, I started feeling momentum. Where before I wanted to give up, I started making decisions. I became a protagonist, a creator, someone who no longer waits but acts. And in that silent action, I started recovering respect for myself, because when you complain, you lose dignity. But when you act even with fear, doubt, tiredness, you rise. Life remains difficult. Injustices don't disappear, but you are no longer the same. You're no longer kneeling before difficulty, you're standing, in motion. And that changes everything, Because the world gives nothing to those who complain, but it opens doors to those who insist, who get up, who take the little they have and turn it into fire. Today, if something hurts me, I don't complain. I move. If something is missing, I don't lament. I build it. If something outrages me, I don't shout. I act. And if I'm alone, if no one understands, if no one applauds, I keep going anyway. Because I've understood that those who get used to complaining need company to justify their paralysis, but those who fight in silence don't need justifications, only direction, determination, and the firm decision to never again say, I can't. Because, yes, you can. You just have to start. Close your mouth, grit your teeth, and move even, if alone, especially if alone. The fourth principle that became an unbreakable law in my life was to build my own discipline when no one demanded anything from me. Because it's easy to be compliant when you have someone on top of you, when you know someone is watching, when you have deadlines, rules, structures forcing you. But when you're alone, when there's no one to call you out if you fail, when there are no immediate external consequences, that's where what you're made of is defined. Because true growth happens in intimacy, in that space where no one sees, but you know perfectly well whether you delivered or not. I realized that as long as I had bosses, teachers, deadlines, I stayed in line. But as soon as those structures disappeared, my strength collapsed. I promised myself things I didn't keep. I drew up plans I didn't execute. I failed myself, and since no one noticed, I excused myself. But there was someone who noticed, Mastiba, and every time I failed in secret, every time I postponed without anyone calling me out, something inside me weakened. Because you can fool everyone except yourself. And living with yourself when you know you're not doing what you should is a silent condemnation. That's when I understood I had to become my own authority, my own system, my own leader. No one was going to wake me up early. No one was going to tell me to stop wasting time. No one was going to demand commitment from me. All of that had to come from me, and when that awareness installs itself, it changes how you move. You stop acting to comply with others. You start acting to not betray yourself because your word becomes sacred, because if you say you're going to do something, you do it, not because someone is watching, but because you said so. And that's enough. That kind of discipline isn't taught, it's built day by day. Uncomfortable. Yes, painful sometimes. Yes, but profoundly liberating, because there comes a point where you no longer need external structures, no longer need anyone to correct you. Laziness no longer stops you. Emotion no longer scatters you. You no longer need motivation. You just need to remember who you are and act in coherence. You become a man who moves by decision, not by circumstance, who acts even when he doesn't feel like it, who delivers even when no one sees, who advances even if absolutely alone. And if you're listening to this, I want you to engrave it. Your discipline is your freedom. It's not a prison. It's a silent declaration that you no longer depend on anything or anyone to advance, that you can keep your word even on your worst days, that you can deliver to yourself without witnesses, without rewards, without external stimulus. And that's where true self-respect is born, because you see yourself being the kind of man you promised to be, and that has no price. Subscribe if this message is resonating with you. This channel is for those building their character in the darkness, for those forming a version of themselves that doesn't need spotlights to exist. And tell me in the comments, what habit are you willing to sustain without anyone demanding it of you? Write it. Not for me to see, but for you to declare it. Because when you commit in silence, life starts moving seriously. Because discipline isn't what you do when you're inspired. It's what you choose when no one is looking, especially when you're completely alone. The fifth principle I installed deep in my routine was learning to become my own source of validation. Because one of the most common and costly mistakes is believing you need someone to tell you you're doing well to keep going, that you need approval, recognition, an external voice confirming your path is valid. But as long as you seek validation outside, you'll remain fragile, because external validation is volatile, inconsistent, and often contaminated by others' fears and limitations. If you don't learn to validate yourself, you'll be at the mercy of anyone's opinions. I lived years waiting for that, well done, that I admire you, that you're on the right track. And when it came, I felt strong, but when it didn't, I deflated. I started doubting, rethinking everything, questioning decisions born from my deepest conviction. And there I understood, the problem wasn't that others didn't see my value. The problem was that I myself doubted it, because knowing what I was doing was right wasn't enough. I needed others to tell me so. Until one day, in the middle of a night of frustration, I asked myself, do I really need someone to approve of the life I'm building? What kind of man do I want to be? One who walks by conviction, or one who needs applause to advance? That night was the start of a new version of me, the version that no longer waits, no longer asks, no longer depends. I started looking at myself honestly each day and asking, were you coherent? Did you give your best? Did you move with purpose? And if the answer was yes, then I didn't need anyone else to say it. I knew it. And that was enough, because when your internal standard is stronger than external opinion, you no longer hold back, you no longer get contaminated, you no longer dilute yourself to fit in. You become solid, determined, armored inside. And it wasn't an immediate change, it was daily training. Learning to recognize my advances, even if no one celebrated them. Learning to sustain my vision, even if the world didn't understand it. Learning to walk with my head held high, even if the whole environment made me feel invisible. Because when you validate yourself from within, every step you take is an act of respect toward yourself. You no longer seek to be seen. You seek to be at peace with yourself. And that peace isn't negotiable. This habit taught me I don't need applause to know I'm growing. I don't need looks to feel I'm on the right track, because the man who validates himself is the freest. He can make mistakes without crumbling, succeed without becoming arrogant, be alone, and still walk firmly, because his compass isn't outside, it's in his soul. And when that compass is well calibrated, nothing stops him. Since then, I applaud myself inside. I give myself credit when I deliver. I confront myself when I fail. I correct myself with respect. I direct myself with intention. There's no stage, no audience, only a constant conversation with myself, because I understood that true respect isn't requested. It's built. And if you want others to respect you, start by stopping begging for their approval. Value yourself in silence. Validate it yourself. And the world, sooner or later, will respond to that internal strength that no longer needs permission to exist. The sixth principle I rooted as a habit was learning to get up quickly after falling. Not with pretty words, not with internal consolation speeches, but with action, with firm steps, with immediate decisions. Because I understood no matter how disciplined you are, how strong you are, how much clarity you have, you will fall. You will fail. You will have days where you betray what you said you would do. You'll break your routine, let yourself be carried by impulse. And there, right there, is where it's defined whether you're truly committed or just temporarily motivated, because anyone can be strong when everything flows. But true character is revealed after the mistake. I used to punish myself a lot when I failed. One lost day would bring me a week of guilt. A bad decision would become an internal discourse. You failed again. You'll never change. This isn't for you. And that guilt disguised as demand hurt me more than the mistake itself, because instead of correcting myself with maturity, I'd beat myself with shame, until I understood. Every minute I invest in lamenting is one less minute I invest in correcting, and the true warrior isn't the one who doesn't fall, it's the one who gets up without drama. That's when I changed my response to failure. I no longer asked myself, why did I do it again? But what do I do now to get back on track? I no longer told myself, I'm weak, but I slipped, but here I am again. Because I learned to forgive myself without loosening up, to recognize my falls without justifying them, to look at myself with compassion, yes, but also with demand, because I don't need to be hugged when I fail. I need to get up, show myself again that I'm greater than my mistake. I turned this principle into a routine. Every time I fall, I have a rule: get up quickly. Do something immediate that reconnects you with your commitment. Don't think about it. Don't debate it. Do it, because the faster you act, the less guilt installs itself, and the more you feed movement, the weaker self-pity becomes. I'm not telling you to ignore your emotions. I'm telling you not to turn them into excuses, because if pain becomes justification, you'll stay there, and I no longer have time to stay on the ground. This habit has saved me more times than I can count. It has brought me back on track when everything seemed lost. It has reminded me I'm human, but also responsible, that I can fail, but never give up, and that every fall can be the start of a new level if I have the courage to get up quickly, not with euphoria, but with humility, not with empty promises, but with real decisions. Today, every time I fall, I get up with more precision. I no longer need days to start again. A moment of lucidity is enough for me, an act, a step, because the difference between an ordinary man and an extraordinary one isn't how many times he falls. It's how long he takes to get up. And I choose to be the one who gets up, who shakes it off, who keeps going, even if it hurts, even if I'm alone, even if no one sees, because I know that every time I get up faster, I become stronger, more reliable, more unstoppable, and that no one can take from me. The seventh principle I installed firmly in my life was learning to work without motivation, to do what must be done even on the dullest, grayest, emptiest days, because I understood that if my action depended on how I felt, then my life would be held hostage by my emotional states. And emotional states are treacherous. Today, you're inspired. Tomorrow, you're broken. Today, you're euphoric. Tomorrow, you don't want to get out of bed. If you don't learn to act without motivation, you'll live trapped on a roller coaster where you never decide. Your mood always decides. For a long time, I waited to feel ready to move. I told myself, today, I'm not energetic, better tomorrow. I need to be more focused before starting. I don't want to force myself because I'll do it poorly. And behind all those phrases was one thing: fear of sustained effort, fear of feeling discomfort, fear of facing myself in those moments when everything inside me screamed, do nothing. But I learned something brutally clear: if you only work when you feel good, you'll never achieve anything extraordinary. That's when I made myself a promise. I'll act the same, no matter how I feel. Not because I'm a robot, not because I don't have emotions, but because my commitment is above my emotional state, because my goals are worth more than my laziness, because my dreams deserve more than my excuse. And from that day, I started making decisions based on what I should do, not on what I felt like doing. I became someone who, even when his body asked for rest, got up, who, even when his mind screamed excuses, kept going, who, even when his soul was silent, walked. And something powerful started happening. At first, the effort was cold, without emotion, without immediate reward. But over time, that repetition gave me a confidence I had never felt before, because I started proving to myself that I was no longer a slave to my impulses, that I could act with pain, with tiredness, with fear, and that is freedom. That is respect. That is internal leadership. When you do what you must at the moment you least want to do it, you become a different man. You transform inside. You become unbreakable today. I no longer ask myself if I feel like it. I ask myself if I have my word, because motivation comes and goes, but discipline, that remains. It's what holds you up when everything else crumbles. It's what guides you when there's no clarity. It's what drags you forward when the world seems to stop. And if you learn to move without needing to feel good, then you've crossed the threshold very few cross, the threshold of those who make history. I don't seek inspiration to start. I find inspiration in the fact I didn't give up, because at the end of the day, what defines a man isn't how he feels, it's what he does with what he feels. And I choose to act with fear, with sleepiness, with doubts, but act because while others wait for motivation, I'm already working in silence, without noise, without pause, because I learned that he who masters action without needing stimulus masters his life. And when you get there, there's no turning back, only constant, solid, unstoppable advance. The eighth principle that transformed me from the deepest part was learning to endure discomfort without seeking escape, because discomfort is the exact space where real growth occurs, but most flee from it. They seek distractions, excuses, immediate pleasures, anything that anesthetizes that internal unease. We live in a culture that glorifies comfort, idolizes instant gratification, trains us to avoid any kind of pain, but nothing valuable is built from comfort. Everything that truly matters, character, strength, direction, is born on the rough terrain of discomfort. I used to evade everything that made me uncomfortable. When a conversation demanded sincerity, I stayed quiet. When a task became heavy, I postponed it. When a routine demanded repetition, I got bored. I jumped from one thing to another, seeking to feel good, seeking that spark that would excite me again. But that emotion was a trap. It kept me on the surface, and the more I avoided the difficult, the weaker I became. Until one day, I got tired of being fragile. I got tired of feeling any wind could move me, and I decided to stay in the effort, in the pain, in the monotonous task, in the uncomfortable conversation, in the truth that hurts, without running away, without anesthetizing myself. And I discovered something brutal. Discomfort is a teacher. It reveals what you lack, confronts you with what you've avoided, shows you the limits you've imposed on yourself. And if you stay long enough, if you don't flee, if you breathe and endure, something inside you changes. A new identity is forged, because he who sits in his discomfort without seeking an immediate exit becomes stronger than any obstacle. He no longer needs life to be easy, he becomes harder to break. I started applying this to everything. When I didn't feel like training, I trained anyway. When anxiety invaded me, I didn't cover it with social media or food. I stayed there observing it. When something hurt, I didn't hide it with cheap motivational phrases. I felt it, went through it. And every time I came out the other side, I felt more in control of myself. Because I was no longer fleeing. I no longer needed life to protect me. I was strengthening myself from within. This habit changed my pain threshold. What used to overwhelm me now barely shakes me. What used to paralyze me now activates me, because I understood that everything worthwhile was hidden behind the threshold of discomfort. The conversations that transform, the habits that shape character, the processes that bring results, all feel uncomfortable at first. But if you have the courage to stay there, to not run away, you become a man who no longer negotiates with effort, who no longer seeks to feel good, but seeks to do what's right. Today I live with a firm conviction: if it hurts, it matters. If it's uncomfortable, you're at the exact edge of your next level. And if you have the courage not to flee, that level breaks. Because discomfort isn't the enemy, it's the threshold, the test, the door everyone wants to avoid. And that's why only a few manage to cross it. But if you choose to stay there, enduring, breathing, advancing, you'll discover a version of yourself you didn't know existed. And that version no longer flees, no longer gives up, no longer hides. It just advances, even if it hurts, especially if it hurts, because that's where real freedom is. The ninth principle that transformed me was understanding that I don't need to be understood. I don't need others to understand why I do what I do, why I choose the difficult, why I isolate myself, why I demand so much from myself. Because on the path of real growth, you will be misunderstood, criticized, misinterpreted, and if you're not prepared for that, you'll end up loosening up, lowering your standards, adapting to the mediocre mold most expect you to fill. But if you're willing to bear misunderstanding, to advance even if no one understands, you free yourself, because you no longer walk to be accepted. You walk to be true. For a long time, I tried to explain my decisions. I tried to convince others my process was worth it. I tried to justify my discipline, my boundaries, my focus. I hoped they'd tell me, "You're right, I admire you, I do the same." But it didn't happen. What I received was mockery, doubt. Questioning, they told me I was missing out on life, that I was exaggerating, that I was alone. And that hurt until I understood. What hurt wasn't their misunderstanding. It was my need for approval. That was the breaking point. When I stopped expecting understanding, everything became lighter because I started choosing without asking permission, advancing without having to explain, sustaining my routine without having to justify it, saying no without giving 1,000 reasons. Because my peace doesn't depend on someone understanding my path. It depends on me understanding it. On me being able to sleep peacefully knowing I'm being faithful to what I chose. And that is worth more than any applause. I started talking less about what I was going to do, showing less of what I was building, keeping silent when asked, "Why so extreme? What's all this effort for?" Because I no longer need to convince anyone. Those who understand can accompany. Those who don't can watch from afar. But my path isn't negotiable. My decisions aren't open to voting because when you empty yourself, explaining your life, you end up living a life you didn't choose. This habit gave me a freedom I never imagined. The freedom not to belong, not to fit in, not to please, because I'm not in this life to be understood. I'm here to fulfill a mission. And that mission often leaves you alone. But it doesn't matter because it's in that solitude that you sharpen yourself, become unstoppable, forge the character that doesn't need external validation, only direction, courage, and discipline. Today I live with a simple rule. If my soul approves it, I don't need to explain it to anyone. I don't waste time justifying what's clear to me. I don't spend energy convincing those who don't want to see. I just keep going in silence, in peace, with firmness. Because when you stop needing to be understood, you access an internal strength that lets you advance without interruptions, without noise, without fear. And that kind of strength, my friend, is conquered walking alone, thinking clearly, living with purpose, even if no one understands, especially if no one understands, because that's the sign you're already living from within, not from without. The 10th and most powerful principle that changed my life was this. Everything you need is already inside you, not in your circumstances, not in your contacts, not in your external resources. It's in your decision, in your internal strength, in your will to hold yourself up, even when you have nothing else. And you only discover that when you're alone, when there's no one to push you, lift you, motivate you, when you're there in silence facing your fears, your excuses, your tiredness, and you choose to keep going. Not because it's easy, not because someone is watching, but because you've decided to never betray yourself again. My whole life changed when I stopped expecting something outside. I stopped expecting ideal conditions. I stopped expecting the environment to change. I stopped expecting someone to choose me, understand me, help me, and I faced the hardest and most liberating truth. If I want something, I build it. If something hurts me, I transform it. If something is missing, I seek it. If I fall, I get up, because no one is coming. No one will take that responsibility for me. And when you take that truth with both hands and make it part of your identity, something awakens. You become impossible to stop. I started acting as if my life depended only on me, because it does. I started moving with urgency, stopped wasting time on things that didn't add up, cut what drained me, worked with a silent intensity without asking permission. I started walking like someone who already knows the path is long, lonely, and demanding, but also completely transformative. Because while everyone seeks company, shortcuts, quick formulas, I chose the hardest path, the one forged in solitude, the one who falls and doesn't give up, the one who doesn't wait for a miracle, but becomes one. And yes, it hurts. There will be nights where tiredness makes you doubt, days where you feel you can't go on, moments where you look around and see no one. But in those moments, if you choose to keep going, if you choose to believe in yourself, even when broken, if you choose to move, even with fear, you'll discover what the world never taught you, that you can handle everything, that you don't need to be perfect, you only need to be determined, that you don't need all the answers, you only need to act from truth, that you don't need applause, only integrity, only internal fire, only that mute scream that tells you, don't stop, not now, not like this. That's the moment you stop being someone else. You become your own support, your own strength, your own reason. You no longer need company. Solitude becomes an ally because you understand that if you can handle everything, and that is freedom, that is power, that is maturity. The world may tremble, people may come and go, the environment may collapse, but you remain firm because you're no longer depending, you're deciding, you're no longer wishing, you're executing. You're no longer fleeing, you're facing. That's the man who changes his life, the one who fought alone, who didn't wait for anything, who didn't give up, who chose with every step to be his own answer, his own guide, his own destiny. And when you get there, there's no turning back because you understood everything you were looking for was already inside you. You only had to decide. You only had to start. You only had to endure the silence and keep going until the end without stopping, without permission, without fear. Number